Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Strength Dojo podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne. Today, we'll be talking about the three following topics: economy of motion, kinetic linking, and some tools to help on both. And first, economy of motion. A basic definition I would give is, on the positive side, chambering movement, flowing motion, and use movements you made to your advantage. Bad economy of motion would be wasted movements or pointless ones, telegraphing, basically doing movements that waste your time and energy and effort. So, an example of a bad one: moving your hand before punching or kicking, hopping around, which seems especially common in tournament and Olympic sports, where martial artists were not tennis players. And a good example of the flowing movement would be a roundhouse kick and following that up with a spinning heel. Another example might be some of the chi sao moves. Not really useful in stand-up, but pretty good in grappling and other things. Chi sao, you'll move from one side and then counter and use that circling motion to get around. And that can be a really good example of good flowing movement, trying to keep things nice, sharp, and flowing. Some chambering examples, which are also a good example, would be ducking and then going straight into an uppercut from there. Or let's say a sidestep that sets up for a kick. So you're sidestepping their attack, sets you up for a good counter kick. Another good one is you're throwing punches, or they're throwing punches, you side bob, and then follow that into a hook. Basically, stick and move, things like that. Good economy of motion. And that is one of the things that really separates good examples of an experienced and trained martial artist versus a scrub. So here are some examples of how to get rid of wasted movements. Or actually, one example broken down into steps. So for this example, we'll be using the side kick broken down into 7 steps. So if you think you have some wasted movement, you're doing bad movements here, this is just one example of how to break down a side kick. I'm sure you have your own version, or were taught your own version. Step 1, turn your lead heel towards the opponent. So you want to make sure you don't do anything crazy with your hands, maybe dropping your hands, raising your hands, sticking them outwards, or some people also bring them, tuck their arms in. So you don't want to change up hand position other than to cover yourself as you transition. Step 2, rotate body and head towards opponent. Step 3, shift weight to lead leg. Step 4, lift leg and extend into kick. And this is a big one where some people might separate it further or condense some of the earlier steps. It doesn't matter. The point of the exercise is you break down a movement into steps and go through those steps to make sure you're not having wasted movements. So back to step 5, retract for leg. Step 6, return leg to floor. Step 7, rotate rear foot to return to fighting stance. So as I mentioned, it's all about really minimizing wasted movements, maximizing positive movements, making sure you move where you need to move, where you want to move, and not moving where it's pointless. So no bobbing unless you need to. Don't flail your hands out. Don't shuffle your feet a bunch. Simply do the bare minimum to properly execute whatever technique you're trying. Another big example I see is when people want to throw, let's say, a cross. They might chamber back, telegraphing, or they might raise or lower their hands before throwing the cross. Those are things you want to keep a lookout for when practicing. So a good way to monitor that is shadowboxing in front of a mirror or just recording yourself. Next up, we have kinetic linking. So using the cross example before, starting from your feet, you want to move in such a way to have that movement and power move from one body area to the next until it reaches the striking body part. The goal is to maximize speed, force, and precision of the strike. You want to use the step-by-step example I gave before and focus heavily on your feet and hips in the case of the cross. Some people are so focused on using their shoulder that you might actually want them to have their shoulder and arm already extended and really force them to focus on the feet and hips, really driving that hip forward with the feet. So don't worry about your arms. Almost all movement leads with the feet or the head. Good linking will help improve economy of motion. It'll help improve your speed. It'll help reduce any wasted movements. Kinetic linking is one of the first things we look at when someone uploads a video. Someone uploads a video saying, "Hey, look at my technique." Okay, how's your kinetic linking? Oh, it's trash. Okay, you weren't really ever taught. Or, oh wow, it's really good. Cool, now that you have good kinetic linking, we can work on other things, such as timing, break timing, whatever else. And finally, the tools. As you noticed, I already mentioned some, such as using the mirror, recording yourself, using the step-by-step breakdown process of a technique. So you can also do simple drills, such as jab punch, or maybe front snap kick into stepping jab. Just something simple where it's between 1 to 3 movements that may include foot movement. So you want to just slow down and focus on performing each movement. Really focus on what you're doing before, during, afterwards. And then, as you have it down pat at the slow speed, slowly work your way up in speed and power. Because some people will have great technique going slow, and then they want to add power, and boom, that's where all their bad habits start kicking in again. Progressively go faster, 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 and more power, until you hit that spot where you see, oh hey, this is where I'm having bad technique. So either work at that speed and try to correct it there, or just reduce the power and speed a little bit to really get the flow down at a slightly slower speed, and then go back up and see if that fixed it. And if it doesn't, maybe just work at the speed and power where you're messing up and just really focus on that aspect of it. Next, performing a meaningful kata. For our traditional martial art guys, I realize a lot of our katas are pretty useless. It's just a series of moves where we have no idea what we're doing, why we're doing it, why the timing of it matters. So pick a kata you really understand. It could be just one you created yourself. Maybe just combine 2 or 3 different drills into one kata. Or several katas in our martial art is simply taking on 1 or 2 opponents. So it might be something like a sidestep with a block, followed by a jab, followed by a hook or a cross, maybe followed up by, let's say, a roundhouse or sidekick. Just throwing out random examples. And as you can see, you have a good idea of what each technique is, why you're doing it, because your imaginary opponent's right there, so you're avoiding their sneak attack and counter striking. Get a kata, and then slowly, just like the simple drills, do the exact same thing. The only difference with this is it's more movements it's one step closer to the conditions of a real fight. In a real fight, you're not going to just jab, punch. That is some of the basic tools I had for you. And this concludes our topic on the economy of motion, kinetic linking, and the tools to help on those two aspects. This has been Dwayne of the Strength Dojo Podcast.